Hey guys, it's Liv here, and in today's video, I wanted to discuss Rotom Wash and why I think that Rotom Wash not only was a missed opportunity, but what Pokemon Radical Red did to drastically improve this Pokemon. Because it's such a small change, but it ends up making a big difference in terms of what Rotom can actually do in competitive and how well it could end up being if Scarlet and Violet do end up implementing this one change. So if you guys want to see more content like this, one, leave a like below on the video and subscribe for more content so I know that you're interested, and two, comment down what other Pokemon you want to see from any sort of ROM hack, whatever buff they had, or even just stuff that you think of in general. I figured at least picking something from Radical Red was a pretty easy one to start with because it keeps it within reason, since Radical Red is built on the foundation of playing against a competitive Pokemon player. So I figured with that in mind, pulling from Radical Red was a very easy starting point. But with that said, let's start off with why I think that this ends up making a big difference for Rotom. So for one, we do have our first set, which is probably the set that makes the biggest jump in quality from Rotom Wash. This is Volt Switch, Scald, Pain Split, and Defog. Now, typically in OU, Rotom Wash has to give up either one of Defog or Will-O-Wisp on any of its sets, or even potentially Pain Split. Those three moves, which typically Pain Split is kept, it's typically between Defog and Willow, and most teams will go for Will-O-Wisp, but typically you end up having to give up a potential slot for utility on Rotom Wash. Whereas with just the standard Rotom Wash, having Scald, you one, gain a more accurate water type move, which by utilizing Scald over Hydro Pump, you're able to consistently hit opposing Pokemon. And on top of this as well, you're able to still get the burn chance, which while it does say it is a 30% chance, I'd like to argue this is actually closer to 90% with how often you get the burn. I wouldn't say 100 because there's always the one time you do actually need it that you'll never get it, but I'd say it's definitely more than 30, or at least it feels like more than 30. The point being, though, is that with Scald in this set, you don't actually need Will-O-Wisp, because even Will-O-Wisp does have a chance to miss, and by combining the fact that both Scald, well, that Scald not only doesn't miss, but also can still burn, with the fact that if you're clicking Will-O-Wisp or Hydro Pump, it could potentially just be a mute turn anyway, I think that Scald is probably just the better option on this. And this does not only open up the chance to compress the burning and the water type stab into one single move, this also actually gives you the option to run Defog, which was a pretty big buff for Rotom in terms of Generation 7. While I won't act like this definitely revolutionized Rotom or anything, it's definitely pretty helpful to give Rotom Defog again, because it does help role compress Rotom into a much more unique role than it currently has. Not to say that it would be some standout Pokemon in OU, and I certainly don't think it would be, but inherently speaking, Rotom being able to do more things should make it at least a more viable Pokemon, which in this case, it's compressing the burning and the water type move into a more viable option, while still being able to fit on hazard removal now, which I would say at least makes Rotom better. I won't act like this game changes Rotom or anything, but again, I think this does definitely have some use, even just on the standard Rotom Wash spread. Now, I do think there are a couple other spreads that could be pretty useful. The first one, of course, being Trick Scarf. Now, Trick is another set that actually does benefit a lot from having Scald, because typically right now you're not even able to fit any way to really burn on Rotom, or you're giving up removal entirely, or even Pain Split potentially. And in this set, you could definitely ditch Defog for Pain Split and still have the same sort of benefit, but the point being is that Trick does inherently become a lot more viable. With Volt Switch, obviously, this is a pretty mandatory move on Rotom, seeing as it is meant to be a pivot, but with Trick Scarf, you're able to actually outpace a lot of different threats in the metagame, considering this does reach above even Pokemon such as Dragapult and Zeraora. However, it's not typically too necessary unless you're trying to pick them off with something like a Scald, let's say. However, where this would definitely shine is giving Trick Rotom a way to still burn Pokemon, while still having another option outside of just the burning for utility. This means you can either throw on Defog and clear hazards while still getting burn, or throw on Pain Split and have your longevity after locking a stall Pokemon into just a recovery move, or some other move that would force them to switch. With Rotom's Scarf set, of course, you're typically just going for the max speed, max HP. I figured the 4 and Phys Def made a bit more sense just to help with taking physical attacks, since you are going for the Scald burn. Your inherent ability with this set would be to try and burn physical attackers. However, you could definitely make a case for throwing it in any of its other stats besides attack, to be honest. I just chose Phys Def. I figured it was the easiest one to go with here. But I do think that Trick Rotom would have a lot more of a place in terms of competitive, especially if you were to give this thing Scald. While it's not a terrible set right now, it's definitely, as far as Rotom Wash sets go, lower on the totem pole in my personal opinion. But I think that giving it Scald does help a massive amount with this role compression. So I hope that they really do give it Scald, because I think this is the set that would probably benefit the most. However, there's one more set that, while I don't think it improves the quality of it to this degree, I will say that it does end up actually becoming just better as a set. This being, of course, Nasty Plot Rotom. Now, I did have to calculate a few different things for this set, of course, to be in its best possible state. For one, this set ends up obviously still hitting the same 88 speed, which I did forget to mention on defensive Rotom. But this is actually utilized specifically to outpace stuff like Adamant Scizor, which is pretty useful when you're trying to, burn Scizor. And being able to just do that with a 100% accurate move with Scald, at the very least, if you don't get the burn, you're still getting off damage, which is pretty cool, because if you don't get the burn with Will-O-Wisp, you're doing nothing that turn. So, pretty useful with that already. Not only this, but in terms of handling Melmetal, with this sort of variation, you actually should be able to, with the 188 Modest, guarantee a 3-hit KO actually, which is pretty insane, because this would be even if Melmetal decided to adopt a more offensive set, or let's say more so actually a more defensive set. Thunderbolt being able to guarantee that 3-hit KO, whereas without any investment, you're not really able to actually do that. So it's pretty useful in my opinion, especially when you are trying to go for the Scald burn. That's why you also have the 232 HP, which allows you to actually make this potentially possible, since otherwise, if you were going with the 88 speed and the 252 HP, you would only actually have 168 EVs left over. But you really only do need the 232 HP, and you still should be able to chew Melmetal hits insanely well. So, in my opinion, I think that this Rotom would end up benefiting the most personally from, well, not the most, I think it's the second most. I think defensive, weirdly enough, benefits the least of the three, but I think this one has a lot more merit, considering being able to still Scald Burn, which Nasty Plot Rotom typically can't do, and not only this, but you're able to actually go for sub, which is actually rather important on this set, because if you were to, let's say, go for a sub, you could potentially get up a free Nasty Plot on something that's more defensive, or maybe something that's trying to get a switch. Let's say, for example, Pokemon like Slowbro that typically, would end up switching around Rotom when it comes in. You're able to get up a sub into a Nasty Plot. The sub would also help you avoid a Toxic in case the opponent decides to try and sack their Pokemon, or even just, getting a free attack off before having to really take anything. The sub is pretty nice, though you could definitely adapt this for Pain Split. I just figured for not taking Toxic, this is rather important in Rotom Wash, since the leftovers should be able to suffice against a lot of bulkier teams. Not only this, but being able to still put on defensive pressure through Scald on Pokemon such as Landorus and Scizor is, again, rather valuable. Making sure those Pokemon aren't going to really do as much damage to your team, even if you aren't necessarily setting up Nasty Plots, is a pretty important part of what Rotom Wash is actually known for doing in competitive. So I think this does end up actually adding a lot of benefit to Rotom Wash, in my personal opinion. But as I said, I think that the benefits of Scald on Rotom Wash are pretty obvious. You get a Water-type move that will guarantee not miss, and on top of it as well, you get a Water-type move that has really no drawback, and if anything, it only has upsides. A lot of people would say that Scald is one of the best Water-type moves that we've ever had introduced, and I really do think it's a shame that Rotom Wash didn't get it in Generation 5. And while you can make a case for a lot of the other Rotom forms needing buffs to moves as well, which Radical Red did provide, and I can do more guides on those other Rotom forms, but for example, stuff like Rotom Frost probably should have had air on a free Blizzard or Freeze Dry even. You could have made a case for Rotom Heat getting stuff like Overheat, or on a, not Overheat, Flamethrower or Fire Blast, or even potentially Scald on that one too, but I think that one makes a bit less sense than Rotom Wash, of course. There are countless things you could do for the Rotom forms, and even outside of different coverage options, or more so different stab options than just the one signature move. There are tons of other buffs you can get, but I think the one with Scald at the very least does make Rotom Wash not only a more practically usable Pokemon, but it also is a buff that you can give to Rotom Wash that doesn't necessarily just make it broken. Throwing something like a Recover on Rotom Wash might be a bit much, though I don't know if it necessarily would break it. I just think it would be a massive quality jump in Rotom to where I couldn't even really start to predict around it, but I don't think it would be necessarily broken. I just think that it would go from barely viable in OU to like an S rank or like an A+ rank Pokemon. So I didn't really want to do some extremist jump, but I think the Scald one, as I said, would make a lot of difference. So if you guys enjoy this type of video and you learned something from it, leave a like below and let me know what Pokemon you want to see next. With that said, I do have a few ideas, obviously, of some stuff in the back, but I'll save those for next Wednesday. And until then, peace out, guys.